The reason we made a film about crows was after visiting Japan and finding it a really interesting place, we wanted to find a way to get into being able to talk about the city and the people and the culture. And in particular, we were very struck by how it's one of the most modern cities on earth, but it's also full of nature like any place else. And they're both there. And the crows seem to be a way to talk about this technological city and nature in one place. So we were first interested in Japan, and then we realized that we could use the crows to address those issues. And also the crow story we thought was in itself interesting. They're very smart birds. They outwit the humans all the time. They figure out where the garbage is being put out, on what day it's being put out. They just simply will not be stopped. That's an interesting question. Is it a personal film? Yes and no, if I can be ambiguous in my answer. Yes, in the sense that we feel that it's a false dichotomy to try to separate nature from human beings or nature from the way human beings live, because it's all one thing. And so I think in that sense, I think the film gives a sense that that is the case. So in that sense, it is our view, because we feel that is the way the world is. And the reason I was being ambiguous is at the same time, we did not want in the film to make it didactic, to make it like an explicit statement of how we looked at things. We wanted to let the story speak for itself. We wanted the city to speak for itself, because we felt if we could give people a sense of what Japanese people are like, what their attitudes are like, what the city's like, what the crows are like, these things would come out, and we would not have to spell them out. We would not have to say them ourselves, and we could keep our voice out of it, which we felt we should, because we're not Japanese, and we didn't want to say too much about a culture about which we really didn't know all that much. Approaching the city as a character caused us a lot of discussion. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that. And we felt actually the best way to do it was just to show a lot of parts of the city, to show people doing a lot of things in the city. So we have, like for example, we have these quick little sections at different times of day. And for example, one of them is about work. I mean, the crows work, the people work, and we just had little snippets of it. And you don't see on a postcard Japanese workmen getting their tools out of a truck. You don't see on a postcard, the cars going by and people having their lunch, before they go back to the office. Or people walking down the street, all of them in their white shirts. They left their suit jackets at home, or suit coats back in the office because it's so hot. We just wanted to make the city visible in all the ways you don't normally think you would see it, in ways that Tokyo is not familiar to you. We did not want a series of postcards. Although we did try to make it, having said that, I would say that we also tried to make it beautiful, because there's many things about Tokyo that are beautiful, or things that happen that are very beautiful. Some people don't think the city is very pretty, and maybe in some archetypal sense it isn't, but in many ways it is. And every city has its places of beauty. It can even be just a city street in fall with the ginkgo trees, turning gold, with the light a certain way. Any place can be beautiful at a certain time, and we tried to get some of that into the film. One thing we felt, in terms of this question of point of view I was talking about, where you're trying to figure out how do you talk about something without being too explicit about it, and then to tie that to the story of why crows. If you sort of are talking about about people who are looking, or things that are looking, you can have a different attitude about what you're seeing. And I think that if we we always made a point of looking for interesting high angles on different kinds of activity. And it's maybe a little obvious that that's the angle of a bird. That's where they roost, at the top of buildings. But we thought that gives you the sense of being outside of human activity and watching the human activity. So that's why we did try to think about a lot of angles in how we shot and paid a lot of attention to that. The difference between a really short film and a longer film, there's a couple things that jump right to mind. For one thing, one reason we've always made short films, and we'll make more, is we don't have to worry about raising money. We don't have to spend a lot of time trying to get grants, we just go out and do it because we do everything. We do it ourselves. We don't have to raise money. And obviously when you do it for a short film, it's even easier. For a longer film, you do need to have more resources. So that immediately is a practical consideration. But we had this fellowship that let us live in Japan, which solved that problem for us in making a longer film here. And another difference is that we've always tried to make films that are what we think about as essays, without a traditional narrative arc. Aristotle's Poetics, the classic, arc. And we just try to sort of make things that are a little flatter and are digressive, just sort of wander around the subject. And I think one difference between a short film and a longer film is that kind of a structure can't support a really long film. I think that's one reason our film is sort of an unusual length. It's 63 minutes, which is sort of short for a feature. But we felt it couldn't be longer. We have tangents we went on, things we filmed that we didn't put in, because at some point I think when you have that kind of a structure, it just sort of collapses of its own weight, because it doesn't have the armature of the classic struggle that's someone confronting a problem and solving it. So that's one difference between the two. I think with this kind of a film, we're limited in length. I think about as far as we could go was the 63 minutes in this case. I have worked in television, editing films for television, documentaries, and I really feel what we do is different from that. I think that what we do, these essay films, are probably not as commercial. They're not as user-friendly. I think the viewer has to sort of relax and get into the slower movement of a film like that. When I've cut for television, it's either been for example, I cut a science film for Nova, and that was very much, a subject that, spent a lot of time with exposition. It was very constrained as far as what we were talking about. Yes, the conventions are very clear. The convention, you're absolutely right. It's the conventions, because you have people explaining things. I've cut a couple National Geographics for National Geographic. It's wall-to-wall narration, and that, isn't what we do for our films. But it's a living. Everybody has to have a day job. I won't try to speak for any place else than the U.S. because I'm not familiar enough. But what I would say is that there's a couple things going on in the United States. I think there is an appetite for documentaries, and actually there always has been an appetite for documentaries. I think that a couple things that have been going on in the States are a good thing and a not so good thing. The good thing is that there's been some commercial success for some documentaries, and anytime that happens, people can make more. And of course there's been, as you well know, these technological advances that allow people to make documentaries with fewer resources. The other thing I think that's happened that's less fortunate is, even though there's so many documentaries, I think there's become, there isn't the variety in documentaries, at least in the United States, that there could be. I think that the conventions are getting more formalized, in part because people look at cable television where everything is very routinized and, like you were saying about the voiceover. My feeling is that in Europe and probably elsewhere, the boundaries are looser and wider. In the United States, I feel they're coming in a little bit, because what works and what's commercial and what TV stations want are things that are more formulaic. It's harder for something unusual to succeed. Well, I think I think any good documentary has a good shot at succeeding. I mean, there are some things out there that are fairly unusual. You know, Fred Wiseman makes these very long, very observational films. And then other people, you know, Alex Gibney has made many films that are very oriented around a social issue, a current issue, ripped from the headlines. But I think anybody who works in any of these styles, if it's good, it can often be successful. But I think what does happen also is sometimes I think the topic trumps the quality. And sometimes when something is very topical or has a lot of attraction because of its subject matter, sometimes the quality isn't there and it can still be successful, meaning it's treated in a very unoriginal way. I'd much rather see a film that is about something that isn't really topical, that is formally really interesting, something different. I mean, anything that's different is good as far as I'm concerned. I'm guessing, and I shouldn't say hoping because all kinds of things can be good, but when I've seen some Romanian feature films, they've had a realistic feel to them. They're very much dealing with, I've seen some shorter films and some longer films, you know, about a man who dies after this odyssey through the medical system, a woman trying to get an abortion, a man who steals eggs when he's, you know, I mean, these are, some of them look backwards to the say the 80s maybe, but they really are dealing with a realistic approach in the ones I've seen, but they also have this really wonderful understated style. They don't hit you over the head the way I think a lot of American documentaries do. Well, some do, some don't. So I'm thinking that this what I think of as a sophisticated way of examining an issue will probably be something that appears in the documentaries as well. So I intend to see some more this week.